this episode, I will be sharing a late night 5:10 session at Grand Villa. I met up with Bluffalo Sam briefly and managed to take this very unflattering selfie with him. Sam is only stopping by for a couple days before he continues on his trip to crush US poker rooms. In an earlier episode, I said goodbye to him as he started his journey, and what a journey it has been. Be sure to check out his channel, his content is just awesome. And now, on to my session. This hand, I pick up 4-6 of spades at the middle position. Everyone folds to me, and I decide to open to $30. Only the low jack calls. It's heads up into a flop of 3-3-10 rainbow. Not a good board for my range nor my hand, so I just check. The villain checks back. The turn comes the 5 of spades. I now pick up an open-ended straight draw. I decide to take a jab here. I don't think I have to bet big since the villain checked back the turn. With a delayed c-bet, I only have to rep high cards like ace-king or ace-queen. If the villain completely missed the board and gave up, a small bet here will do the trick. I block all the draws with the straight draw myself. I bet 1/3 the pot at $25. The villain calls. Not what I was hoping for. However, the river is an ace. This gives me a chance to follow through with my story, having an ace in my hand that might value bet after hitting the river. I go for a bet of $100. The villain folds and I take this one down. This hand, I pick up King Jack on the button. Only the cutoff limps, and I decide to isolate with a raise of $40. Everyone folds except for the limper. It's heads up into a flop of ace-queen-6 rainbow. I don't really hit the board aside from picking up a gut shot, but this board is excellent for my range as the preflop raiser. The villain checks. I just bet small at $30, and that's good enough to take it down as the villain folds. This hand, I pick up ace-jack of spades in the middle position. I open to $30, only the button calls. It's heads up into a flop of ace-queen-3 all clubs. I do hit top pair, but out of position, I'm basically checking here on this board with all of my range. I check and the villain checks back. The turn is a 7. I decide to check again for pot control. At this point, I mostly want to get the showdown without needing to make too tough of decisions. Maybe with a value bet on the river. These small pots are pretty good for protecting my checking range as well. The villain bets $25. Easy call for me with top pair and good kicker. The river is the dreaded 10 of clubs. If it were any non-club card, I can bet for value, but now I'm forced to check yet again because I'm just not getting any value from worse hands. The villain checks back, which is a good sign. I table my hand and I'm good. This hand, I pick up pocket aces in the low jack position. I open to $30. The hijack calls and the big blind calls. It's three-way to a flop of 4 king jack with 2 spades. The big blind checks. Typically, this would be a pure c-bet in this spot if it were heads up. I decide to go a different route and check for pot control. I do miss a street of value from a flush draw, but I double block ace-king, so the one specific hand I can really get value from, possibly 2 streets of value, would be king-queen. And I want to avoid getting raised or check raised by a combo draw. The hijack also checks. The turn card comes an offsuit 5, which is a brick. The big blind now leads out for $60. Having underrepped my hand, it's an easy call for me. The hijack folds, and this is the perfect scenario to play out the final street. The river is the 10 of clubs. The big blind now checks. This card improves king 10 or jack 10, but it's not very likely the villain will check either of those hands. I block ace queen for the nut straight, and queen 9 is just never leading out on the turn. I put the villain on a one pair hand like king queen or jack queen, wanting to get the showdown. I decide to value bet targeting those 2 hands. I bet $125. I think king queen is hard to lay down here, and Jack Queen might call me off since there is a missed flush draw out there. The villain thinks for a while and calls. I table my hand and he mucks. This hand, I pick up Ace Jack in the low jack position. I open to $30. The button and the big blind calls. It's three-way to a flop of Ace Queen 9 with 2 clubs. Everyone checks. The turn comes the King of Spades. The big blind checks. I now double block all flush draws. I decide to go for a small bet targeting all straight draws and weaker pairs, and possibly a weaker ace for value. I bet $35. And everyone folds. This hand, I pick up Jack Queen of clubs on the button. The middle position opens to $30. The hijack calls. I call as well. The small blind and big blind calls. It's 5-way into a flop of Queen 8-8 with 2 hearts. Everyone checks to me. Even though I hit the queen, in a multi-way single raise pot, it's definitely possible for someone to be trapping with an 8x hand here. I check back. My hand has good showdown value, and that's what I'm aiming to get to. The turn is the 3 of clubs, a brick. Everyone checks to the hijack, who bets $50. For now, I'm beating Queen 10, middling pocket pairs, and maybe 3x hands like Ace 3 suited, or flush draws deciding to take a jab. I call. The small blind and big blind folds. The middle position, however, check raises to $150. The hijack calls. At this point, I don't see myself beating any value hands. If it were heads up, I could be dealing with a combo draw against the check raiser, but with 2 opponents, I'm likely drawing pretty dead. It's just not very likely that one guy is bluffing into 2 people and the other is deciding to call light, as in weaker than Queen Jack. I decide to let this one go, and I'm glad I did because it turns out one of the villains was trapping with a full house. This hand, I pick up King Queen at the cutoff. The low jack opens to $25. The hijack folds. I have a pretty good hand in position, but I don't want to just cold call here against the late position open. I decide to 3-bet this one. I make it $75, hoping to either take it down now or isolate. Everyone folds and the low jack calls. It's heads up into a flop of Deuce 4-7 rainbow. The villain checks to me. The board doesn't connect with me, but likely doesn't connect with the villain as well. I think I can rep all sorts of good hands in this spot, like any pocket pair or ace high hands that could be good. I bet $50, and the villain folds. This hand, I pick up pocket 5s on the button. Under the gun +1 limps, low jack limps, and the cutoff limps. I decide to limp as well to set mine. The small blind calls and big blind checks. It's 6-way to a flop of Ace Ace 10 with 2 spades. Everyone checks. The turn is another ace. Everyone checks to me. With this action and board, there's actually a good chance I have the best hand right now with a full house. If everyone completely whiffed, which is what it looks like, I really don't have to bet that much at all to take it down, but I do want to bet something for a little protection. I bet a very fishy $10, and everyone folds. This hand, I pick up Queen 4 of hearts on the button. The hijack opens to $35. I decide to cold call this one. Everyone else folds. It's heads up into a flop of Deuce 6-8 with 1 heart. The villain checks. This board is better for my range as the preflop caller, so even though I basically completely missed and have nothing but Queen High, I bet $50 hoping to take it down. And the villain folds. This hand, I pick up pocket jacks at the cutoff. The low jack opens to $35. The hijack folds. I re-raise to $100. Everyone folds and the low jack calls. It's heads up into a flop of 8-5 deuce with 2 diamonds. The villain checks. I c-bet for $75. The villain calls. The turn is another deuce. The villain checks again. I don't think the turn card helped either of us. I continue to bet for value. I bet $200, targeting 8x hands, pocket 9s, pocket 10s, or any draw. The villain check raises me to $600. Not a great spot. There's not a lot of combo draws on that board that wouldn't just check raise the flop. For value hands that I beat, it would only be ace-8 suited, pocket 9s or pocket 10s, and he'd have to be overplaying those hands for a check raise. There's also 2 combos of ace-deuce suited that could randomly be in there. Pocket kings and pocket aces will probably 4-bet pre-flop out of position, but pocket queens can flat call. And of course, flopping a set and turning full house is definitely possible. I have the jack of diamonds. I don't think it means much here, but it does make it less likely he has the flush draw. I decide that he is raising more likely for value as opposed to bluffing in this spot, and I just don't beat enough value hands. I let this one go. For the final interesting hand of the session, I did not capture the footage. I was actually asked very nicely by a player just sitting down. He says he prefers not being recorded, and I happily comply when anyone asks. I pick up ace-king on the button. The low jack opens to $30. The hijack and cutoff folds. This player is very loose and aggressive, and some would call him a maniac. I have been waiting to get into a good spot with him. I decide to re-raise, mainly to isolate. I 3-bet to $90. The small blind folds. The big blind decides to call. When the action gets back to the low jack, he 4-bets to $150. If I call here, I will definitely price in the big blind, who most likely also wants to be in the pot with the low jack because of his playstyle. I can't let that happen. The low jack 4-bet really doesn't mean much here, as he does have a history of doing that kind of thing with all sorts of weird hands. I decide to 5-bet here to isolate again. I'm just thinking of the right price to squeeze out the big blind. I don't think the low jack is folding to any size bet. I make it $450. The big blind folds and the low jack calls. It's heads up into a flop of king 7-5 rainbow. The villain checks to me. Top pair, top kicker here is just an amazing spot. I pretty much just want to get everything in by the turn or river. I bet $500. The villain calls. The turn is the 4 of diamonds. The villain now jams all in for about $1,500. Against this particular player, whose range is ridiculously wide, top pair is just good here too often. I unblock the diamonds, so he could be jamming, having picked up a backdoor flush draw. I think he will also do this with any 6x hand that's not a straight. Sometimes he can show up with the straight, sets, or weird 2 pairs here. And for this player, he just gets paid off if he hits. I don't really think too long before making the call. The river is a 5. We table our hands, and I get shown the bad news. He has 5-6 of clubs for the river trips to scoop a $5,000 pot. I decide to call it a night after that hand, just in case I go into tilt mode and start playing horribly. I do manage to snap a photo of Garret, aka Nova's artistry, to share with you guys. Thanks again, Garret, for the thumbnail. The session did not go great. I certainly did not play perfectly, but I am happy with how I played for most of the session. The last hand destroyed me, but that's poker. As consolation, the next day I had a nice lunch at a place called Me 10 at Aberdeen Center. For me, Japanese cuisine is always a treat and hard to go wrong. For this session, I bought in for $4,669 and cashed out for $2,536. That is a loss of $2,133. For those of you watching that enjoy my videos and have not had a chance to subscribe yet, please remember to do so. It does help a lot. And that will be it for now. Hope you guys look forward to the next episode.